We are in a cold civil war. Funny, I'm sure there's going to be a ton of people who look at the title of this video and say something like Tim's being hyperbolic and Tim's exaggerating, and I'm actually citing a Princeton professor. Quote, "We are in a cold civil war." What we've seen over the past few days may not actually be related to this potential civil war, except for El Paso. We assume that to be, for the most part, accurate. The Dayton shooting, for those that aren't familiar, I'm assuming you are familiar, but we had two shootings, El Paso, which was driven by a weird white identitarian balkanization ideology. The guy talked about splitting up the U.S. into regions based on race or something, but it was a white identitarian idea. Now that group, the white identitarian types, I don't think are necessarily dominant players in the culture war. However, it doesn't matter. It fuels the rise of the far left, which is more likely to be embraced by mainstream culture. What we saw in Dayton, Ohio, was a guy who carried out an act which seemingly makes no sense. We don't know his motivation. We do know the guy was very pro-Antifa, very far left, pro-democratic socialists and all of these things, but we don't know why he did what he did. I actually would lean towards right now saying it probably wasn't politically motivated. We just don't know. Simply because he had these ideologies doesn't mean he did it for any reason. The attack was seemingly random. At the same time, even though the guy in El Paso put out a manifesto, he went to a Walmart and shot a bunch of random people. It doesn't seem to make sense either. So I can't tell you I can tell you that the rhetoric emerging from this is showing us that it doesn't matter who did what or why. What matters is that people are pushing their ideology, their fake news, their interpretation. All of this is resulting in a divide that can never be mended. And when you see two mass shootings where the ideology behind both groups are elements of the growing cultural crisis, it starts to look like a civil war is coming into focus. I don't know what a civil war in this era would look like. I have said in the past, I hate using the word civil war specifically because people imagine like two groups marching towards each other, fighting over the government. Some kind of conflict is happening. Some kind of civil war, at least according to this Princeton professor. And I said before, what we're going to see is insurgency. And I think that's where we're walking into. I want to make a point before we get into, I got a ton of sources that I want to show you that freak me out. But I want to make one important point. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When we look at history, we are looking at bullet points condensed into single pages. When in reality, what led up to World War I and World War II happened over a long period of time. And it's probable that when the wars first started, actually it's a guarantee, when World War II first started, people didn't know it was World War II. They didn't call it World War II. The United States wasn't involved for quite some time until after Pearl Harbor. It's a very complicated situation. So the war is raging in Europe. And what are people in the US saying? Are they saying we are in World War II? No. When we look in the history books, they talk about what the US was doing at the time and how it led to what we now call World War II. It's a complicated process. But we could be in the Great Conflict. And in 50 years, they'll say the whole thing started in 2014 with Gamergate, or in 2011 with Occupy Wall Street, or in 2008 with the Great Recession. We don't know. We don't know how history will look back upon us. We can't see in front of us. But in 100 years, they may be talking about this great conflict. Now, it's entirely possible nothing happens. I have no idea. But it's starting to seem like the things I've been expecting to happen are happening. People of various ideologies carrying out extremist acts. One seems to be more cut and dry. One I'm not sure of. But when you stand back, regardless of what these people are claiming to do, you will have people just looking at the El Paso guy and blaming Trump. You will have people looking at the Dayton guy and blaming the left for refusing to address mental illness or for scaring this guy and freaking him out with left-wing ideology, of which he posted a ton of. This Princeton professor is targeting Trump. So I want to take a look at this, but before we do, I must stress, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. The important thing here, YouTube has deranked independent political commentary. I guarantee you this video will not be monetized. It can't be. You know, and it's ridiculous considering CNN will cover the same stories. CNN will monetize in the same way, but YouTube won't allow it. And I will stress that I've asked you to share my videos if you like them. And I tried one day without doing it and I saw the numbers take a massive hit. So I've actually done this back and forth to see like total number, trying to experiment. So I'm greatly appreciative of everybody who does share these videos because it really is solving the problem of YouTube deranking my channel and other channels. Let's get into the news and talk about, here's what I want you to envision. A year ago, I said, I believe we are facing some kind of new civil conflict, some kind of urban crisis, a cultural crisis, whatever you want to call it. And we're seeing street battles and street violence. We're seeing the rhetoric escalate. And I don't know what form it'll take, but I think it's happening. Now it kind of feels like, to me, we're starting to see the image become clearer and clearer when you have these two incidents in one day with two people who held specific ideologies. I'm not talking about the motive right now. I understand the motive isn't clear. The one guy, it seems to be, although I don't think they've actually verified the manifesto, they believe it to be, for the most part, accurate. The other guy didn't have it. We don't know his motive yet. The point is, however, people will take it one way or another. That's the issue. Perception, perspective, perception is reality. Let's read this story here about the cold Civil War, and then I want to move on to the current news. And trust me when I say I'm putting these pieces together. Princeton professor Eddie Glaude Jr., responding on Sunday to the shooting deaths of at least 20 people in El Paso, Texas, said the U.S. is in the midst of a cold civil war. What happens when we use language like infestation? Glaude said on NBC's Meet the Press. You set the stage for people who are even more on the extreme to act violently. We are in a cold civil war, and there are some people who bear the burden of it. We have children in El Paso right now who just witnessed their friends and family members shot down because someone thinks there's a Hispanic invasion of the country, which is almost the exact same language of the President of the United States, he added. Now, this guy in El Paso was extremely lethal, and that's why fringe right-wing extremism is typically more dangerous and more deserving of government resources, and I've said it a million times. Of course, I'm pretty sure the far left doesn't care because I'm very critical of them. Why? The far left engages in low-level violence frequently. They're not very good at it. It's not particularly lethal. Though they do try. They beat the crap out of people. So they get the focus because people won't call them out. This story is a perfect example. Let's break down what this guy said. He said, what happens when we use language like infestation? Let me rewind. What happens when we use language like concentration camp? Tim Pool said on his channel, you set the stage for people who are even more on the extreme to act violently. Sounds very similar to what I said a few days ago. We are in a cold civil war, and there are some people who bear the burden of it. Let's rewind now. He said, or let's go forward to where he says, it's almost the exact same language of the President of the United States. Rewind. Concentration camp is also the exact same language of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and we saw a guy try to firebomb an ICE facility. When that happened, I called it out. Okay, it happens frequently, so I call it the left frequently. When the right stuff happens, I made 3 videos about what happened in El Paso, specifically about the ideology and the fear of escalation. When the guy in Tacoma does the same thing, I made a video about that. The issue is the extremists on the right, while it is seemingly increasing in frequency, depending on which source you're using, I can't make a video about it every single day when nothing is happening. But the left engages in a lot of low-tier stuff, and I'll absolutely call it out. I don't believe this man is wrong. I believe there is an issue with the use of language and how it leads people to become more extreme. Absolutely. But the problem is on both sides. We can see people, like this guy in El Paso, absolutely was listening to the rhetoric of conservative talking points. Conservatives denounce the violence, reject identitarianism, however. So am I going to blame that person for pointing it out? No. When the left criticizes the far-right extremism, they're right to do so. Far-right extremism is a bad thing. However, the far left is then radicalized by it. The only thing I think we're missing in this debate is the mainstream left not calling out the far left extremism, only rallying around the far right extremism. Even when Trump himself denounces white supremacy, they don't care. They don't care. And this is why I'm saying the Civil War is coming into focus. Let's move on. This story was published in November. What are the chances that America's disunion turns into a civil war? I don't actually care for the most part about the analysis of the story. I just want to highlight that they did a poll and said 1/3 of all Americans think a conflict could break out within the next 5 years, with 10% thinking it's very likely to happen. Back in March, State Department official Keith Mines told Foreign Policy magazine, it's like 1859. Everyone is mad about something and everyone has a gun. He rated the odds of a second American Civil War breaking out in the next 10 to 15 years at 60%. That's the important takeaway. Now let's take a look at this guy Connor Betts briefly. He was a leftist. He posted about guns. He actually had some interactions with the Socialist Rifle Association about the effectiveness of bump stocks, and referred to it as potential advice. I think that's a little hyperbolic. I can't tell you what it was. They were having a conversation about gun rights. This is a guy who was very leftist, using his pronouns, and we don't know what his motivation was or why he was killing the people he killed. For all we know, it could have been him targeting the 1%, and his sister was an accident. We don't know. Well, let's move on. I want to get more to the crux of the Civil War stuff outside of this. The Ohio gunman called himself a pro-Satanist leftist who supported Elizabeth Warren. This article is an example of what's going to happen and why it's dangerous. I made a video saying he was a confirmed leftist. His motive was unclear, and I try to stress in the video, we don't know why he did what he did, as I'll try to do in this video. It doesn't mean that he was driven by ideology. But it does mean you will see articles emerge where people will say he supported Elizabeth Warren, he was a leftist, motivation be damned. They will simply say, hey, this is who this guy was, and this will make people, look, there's going to be people on the right, militia-style people, or just conservatives saying, I get it, we don't know his motive, it's time to arm anyway. Now, interestingly, this guy actually did tweet about arming because of civil conflict. So I can get a little bit into his motive and talk about this, and I'll show you this right here. I want to come back to this tweet later. Jack Posobiec tweeted, this is awkward. We can see this man, Mehdi Hassan, quote, after El Paso, we can no longer ignore Trump's role in inspiring mass shootings. He said, my latest on the tragic carnage this weekend and how the shooter's white nationalism talk of invasion and approval of send them back fits a pattern. Please read and share. Jack then tweeted this from the Twitter account of the Dayton shooter. Yet Mehdi Hassan tweeted in March. He said, quote, yes, let's defeat or impeach Trump, but what if he doesn't leave the White House? My latest piece for The Intercept on all too plausible and deeply dangerous and maybe violent scenario come 2020. To which the Clayton guy said, arm, train, prepare. At this point, we can see the danger of the rhetoric. By saying Trump won't leave the White House, by saying Trump wants to kill migrants in their concentration camps, this guy was tweeting, arm, train, prepare. Is it possible that the only reason he was armed and had guns and was tweeting with the Socialist Rifle Association is because the rhetoric drove him to that point? Now, we don't know why he killed people in Dayton, but perhaps we can say there's at least some circumstantial evidence that the only reason he had guns in the first place was because of the rhetoric of people saying Trump, is a far-right extremist. Trump won't leave the White House. The rhetoric escalates. I don't care what your opinion is on Trump for this video. The point is the perception that the right is going to say this dude is arming. He's tweeting about arming. Why wouldn't someone prepare? The left has already been preparing. They've been talking about the John Brown Gun Club. We've seen what's happened in Tacoma. Both sides are gearing up for a major conflict. I would fail at my job if I didn't go back to the El Paso shooter and mention the criticism and articles from the New York Times, for instance. They say, analysis, El Paso shooting suspects manifesto echoes Trump language. And that's what we saw in the tweet from the guy, Mehdi, where he talks about invasions, he talks about, open borders and things like this. But that's not necessarily Trump rhetoric. That's just general rhetoric. And I'll stress this right now. Every conservative, including Trump, has condemned this guy. He went nuts. I mean, it's insane and extremely deadly and lethal. Even the problem now is because Antifa is particularly ineffective, they're doing a bunch of small, I'll look at them like, low blow haymakers, fast punches that do damage here and there, but aren't big enough to get people to stand up on their seats. Not like a blinding uppercut that sends a guy flying back 20 feet. What we see with the far right is that it's rare relative to the amount of violence on the left, but extremely lethal. So I do think it is warranted to say we need resources to stop that from the federal government. I'm wary of expanding executive authority, but hey, I'll agree with the left all day and night. Yes, let's stop these people. They're insane. At the same time, we need the left to condemn Antifa more. Shaun King praised what happened in Tacoma. We cannot accept this. You need to stop it before it gets to that point. But let's move on. Copycat is arrested after making threats to shoot up a Florida Walmart because he was intrigued by El Paso, Ohio massacres. Gibbstonson Walmart in Florida received a call threatening to shoot up the store. Wayne Lee Paget, the son of an employee, identified as the threatening caller. Hillsborough County Sheriff said Paget was intrigued by recent shootings. He was arrested and faces felony charges of a false report and making a threat. Now, they call him a copycat. Again, whatever this guy's motives was, I have no idea, but expect more of this. There is something I talked about the other day called a standalone complex, where the guy in Dayton and the guy in El Paso are completely unrelated, but initially it seemed to be, it was possibly a concerted effort. A standalone complex is when unrelated incidents, unrelated people do things in a similar way that gives rise to the impression of a concerted effort. It turns out they actually had diametrically opposed ideologies, but that's the point. It seemed to be that way. This guy is a copycat. When this guy in El Paso does this, he cited Christchurch. He talked about, my understanding is he talked about New Zealand. Don't be surprised when more people hear about this and act in a similar way, and it's ideologically driven. This is another example of the dangers of far-right extremism. And look, I don't know what the solution is. I really don't. I can tell you, blaming the mainstream left as, fascists, blaming the mainstream right as fascists isn't solving the problem. If Trump condemns this, if conservatives condemn this, good. It's the best we can do. Now, left, please condemn your extremists. I'll be waiting. Many have. I'm not, don't get me wrong, but I just don't see it. And the problem is, when this crazy guy echoes a lot of similar talking points we've heard from, the far right, and it overlaps with what Trump is saying, they blame Trump for it. They blame Trump to a rather absurd degree, to where we see this guy, Mehdi Hassan, blame Trump, but literally his blaming of Trump is what at least provides some evidence that the guy in Dayton armed because of it. In this tweet, I want to talk about the truly scary thing that we're seeing now. The propensity of fake news to drive the narrative and make people insane, and I don't see any way of stopping it. This woman, Imani Gandhi, is an analyst for Rewire News, tweeted, "Shooter. I was inspired by Trump. Media. What could have caused this? Shooter. Look at this cool photo of the word Trump spelled out in firearms. Media. He probably played too much Fortnite. Shooter. It's like Trump said, Hispanics are invading us. Media. We may never know." Nearly 200,000 retweets. The problem? It's completely fake. The whole premise behind this tweet is completely fake, but extremely influential. For one, the media is absolutely blaming Trump and Trump's language. Fact check number 2: the photo of gun with Trump, the photo of Trump spelled out with firearms, is not from this shooter. That's fake news. That photo was from a long time ago. Media is not blaming Fortnite. The New York Times, the paper of record, is blaming Trump to an extent. The media, we may never know. This creates an image that the media can't be trusted. It's not like, I think the media, for the most part, can be trusted, but distrusted media, pushing fake influence, and allowing propaganda to spread. What are you going to do? This is somebody saying it's Trump's fault. Spreading fake news about Trump spelled out in firearms, again, going to radicalize people. It doesn't matter who is doing the radicalization, from a copycat who's agreeing with the message to people spreading fake news. Again, I'll say it for the millionth time, we've seen far-right extremists go nuts. We don't know the motive of the guy in Dayton. I don't think it's likely ideologically driven, but at least we can say there's some evidence to suggest he was armed because of it. And here comes the more, look, it's coming into focus, okay? Reza Aslan, he said, "After today, there is no longer any room for nuance. The president is a white nationalist terror leader. His supporters, all of them, are by definition white nationalist terror supporters. The MAGA hat is a KKK hood, and this evil racist scourge must be eradicated from society." Where do you think we go next? The professor from Princeton who said, when you use words like infestation, it's the exact same language of the president. Yeah, when you use words like concentration camp, it's the exact same language as Ocasio-Cortez. When Reza Aslan says they must be eradicated, they must be eradicated. Wow. I think we can see where this is going. It's not stopping. Reza Aslan, with his hundreds of thousands of followers, tweeting this out with no repercussion. Shaun King praising a terrorist. No repercussion. I think we can see where it's going. So I was asked recently, how come I'm always ragging on the left? This is why. Show me the conservative cheering on any of this. I'll be waiting. I can show you the leftists who are cheering it on, who are blaming Trump and making the problem worse, even when the president condemns the violence, even when he calls it out. I don't think the president is perfect. I think that he's boorish, and I disagree with a lot of his policy. But to act like Trump is making this happen is absurd, especially when you see this New York Times story, which absolutely mentions the suspect wrote that his views predate Trump. Of course they do. Trump isn't the cause. Trump is a symptom. I think Trump may actually be slowing things down to an extent by making these people think it's not as bad or potentially, actually, you know what? I think the best way to put this is how Will Chamberlain phrased it. I don't have the tweet pulled up, but Will said what's causing this is the fact that Trump has scorned these people. And now they feel that the little hope they had is gone. Will made the point, I think it was Will, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, that when Trump first got elected, the media was saying all of these things that got white nationalists actually hopeful until Trump came out and condemned them. And then they got angry and felt they had no recourse. Trump is a symptom, in my opinion, of a rise in this fear over immigration, these other issues. But let's move on, because I want to make sure I stress. In what I'm trying to say is, I would never put the blame on Trump for this. That makes no sense. It only makes things worse. If you can't honestly think every Trump supporter is a racist and contributing to this. Are there a small portion? Of course there are. There are a small portion of anti-Trump people who are psychotic, crazy people as well. The point is, the solution to this is not to blame Trump or to blame Nancy Pelosi. But what am I going to say about Reza Aslan, who's literally saying that Trump supporters should be eradicated? I don't know, man. I don't know. You want to tell me why I'm pointing the finger at the left and not Trump? Well, Trump's condemning it. I can't say that it's perfect. I can't say it's going to solve the problem. Reza Aslan's promoting it. What do you want me to say? Show me the conservative cheering this on. Let's move on. In this story, I want to make sure I stress, the FBI said on August 1st that they were wrong about the Garlic Festival shooter's white supremacy ideology. The reason I highlight this is that among the left, they're saying that the FBI is defending them because the FBI are white supremacists. There was a shooting. It was reported the shooter was a white supremacist. The FBI is saying that's not true. I highlight this to tie back to the idea of fake news. These people are going to push their ideology no matter what happens. They're going to claim it's true no matter what happens. Facts be damned. And then we can see that things will just continue to escalate. And just the other, this is actually from today, I believe, or at least maybe it was updated. The Washington Examiner said Trump must name and condemn the evil of white nationalism. And Donald Trump did. Trump said we must condemn white supremacy. What did Reza Aslan say? He said that Trump and his supporters must be eradicated from society, even though conservatives called for the condemnation of white nationalism and Trump condemned white supremacy. It doesn't matter. This is why I think the left is worrying me. Look, man, you get both sides to say stop, enough, I'll be happy. Trump said it. Conservatives have called for it. Maybe there are some conservatives calling for it I'm not seeing, but from where I'm sitting, I see Shaun King, Reza Aslan, and other high-profile leftists calling everybody Nazis, calling everybody fascists, and calling for more violence. Now, people made fun of Trump because he accidentally said Toledo. I'm just going to give you this update for the sake of giving you the update. Joe Biden also incorrectly stated the locations as well. And then we have this story where we go on to the final portion, just more of a news update. Trump has blamed mental illness, the internet, and computer games following El Paso and Dayton. You know, it's foolish to blame video games, but I will say this. I think it's better to have the problem be mental illness or social media than for it to be the people. Reza Aslan's rhetoric scares me. This woman from Imani Gandhi scares me. 200,000 retweets with fake news blaming the president. Reza Aslan blaming the president. And then I look over and I see conservatives and the president condemning it. The problem is coming into focus. You want to ask me why I'm really concerned about the rise of the far left? Well, they're identitarians. They share a similar but conflicted ideology with the guy in El Paso. They do. It's true. And it emboldens people like the guy in El Paso. I don't care if you want to accept it or not. It's true. Identitarianism, it takes many forms. There's left-wing identitarianism. They want identity-based policies. They want people to be recognized based on their identity. And you have a similar call from the white identitarians. They are forming their group based on their identity. It's a complicated thing to break down, but it all comes down to identity politics, to the extreme. I'll say it again. Identity politics can be a good thing, civil rights for one, but it can be an extreme thing. Identitarianism is the extreme end. And we can see it on the left. We can see Kirsten Gillibrand blaming white people. We can see the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee ousting its top staff for being white. And when you see these things, the equal and opposite reaction emerges on the white side. Call it left, call it right, I don't care. When the left blames white people, when Sarah Jong tweets against white people, you radicalize people. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It is wrong to blame people because of their race, and it is, period. And I think that statement should be clear. It will condemn the white identitarians and the anti-white identitarians, period. Unfortunately, while we aren't seeing, for the most part, anti-white identitarians engage in extreme violence, it's happened sometimes. We had the guy in Dallas. We had a guy in Brooklyn, which was just outside of my house. But you're seeing it on the left. And I think it's fair to point out, many people on the right say, if it comes to civil war, the right will win because they have all the guns. But I will also stress, don't be surprised then when it's the far right extremists who are the ones who are coming out with the guns and being better, I shouldn't say better, but more effective, more lethal. I don't want to say better because I don't want to imply any positivity. No, it's nightmarish. It's dystopian. But of course the left is ineffective. The guy who showed up to Tacoma failed miserably and was killed and burned a car. That's a point made by the right when referencing the Civil War, right? The left is increasingly engaging in low-tier violence. If they were more effective with their weapons, this would be a terrible nightmare. But the right is better with guns. So when one of these people goes crazy and embraces identitarian ideology, you can expect to see exactly what you'll see. Left and right, I don't even know what it means anymore for the most part. It's so confusing. You know, this guy in El Paso espoused like pretty left-wing policy ideas, and you're going to see people say, no, he was really left-wing, no, he was really right-wing. I don't care. They're identitarians. That's what matters. They are driven by an ideology where they, like, the guy in El Paso, let me make it absolutely clear, referenced dirty race mixers. Yeah, he's talking about me. I understand that. He's talking about my family. I get it. These are not good people. But I have never experienced this kind of sentiment among mainstream conservatives. I've actually experienced it among mainstream left. Kirsten Gillibrand type people. White privileged elites who are telling me. So I'll tell you this, man. I don't think it's necessarily the fault. Well, you know what? There's nothing I can do. It's dominoes falling over. I try to condemn identitarianism across the board, but the left is embracing it. They are. Kirsten Gillibrand on that 2020 debate stage with that nightmarish ideology, telling people she's going to go to white suburban moms and explain their privilege to them. When you push this rhetoric, when the Democrats oust the top staff of the DCCC for being white, don't be surprised when you get your equal and opposite reaction. So I don't see a solution to this. All I know is it's going to get scary. And I just want to end by stressing this. It's coming into focus. What Reza Aslan said should be terrifying to all of us. Will we see people on the left call it out? I honestly think the answer is, for the most part, no. Of course there are people on the left who call it out. But in the mainstream, are we going to see John Oliver, Bill Maher? No. Well, Bill Maher maybe. Bill Maher's pretty all right. Although he's got some kooky ideas and keeps calling for a recession, which, dude, chill. But in the mainstream left, they're going to play it safe and play to their base. So it's starting to look like a civil war. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Stick around. Next segment will be coming up, youtube.com/TimCastNews at 6 p.m., and I will see you then.